Hey everybody, this is Itzli from kalmekakanawak.com, and today I'm going to be continuing what we started last week with just some guides, classes on how to read the Pre-Columbian Codices. I firmly believe that, in order to really fully understand our indigenous worldview before the Spaniards came, it's really critical to understand the codices that existed in pre-Columbian times. And so last week we talked about the first page of the Codex for Jebari Meyer, and I hope that you were able to see that video and also see just the layers of meaning in that one page. And today we're moving on to the Aztec Sun Stone. Okay, a lot of you may have heard of it as the Aztec calendar. Okay, and we'll talk about why it was named Aztec calendar, and why it's also named the Aztec Sun Stone. But you may be wondering, well, this isn't a codex. This is a stone, a stone sculpture, and you may be wondering why this is part of the series. And honestly, I wanted to show you that not only did our people write our history and culture in books, but they also etched them in these sculptures. And not only that, but the work that we see in these sculptures actually corresponds to the codices very well, to the pre-Columbian codices. So it's almost, and in my opinion, it's almost like just having another, book here in front of you, because it has so much information and so many layers. I think it's really important to understand the Aztec Sunstone because it's one of the symbols of our culture. It's probably the most prevalent symbol in all of Mexico when we talk about the national Mexican culture and indigenous culture. This is it right here. So I think that a lot of people appreciate the beauty of it, but not very many people actually understand what is in the actual stone. So that's what we're going to go over today. And so the goal is that hopefully at the end of this lesson that you'll have a deep understanding of all of the symbols in the Aztec Sunstone, so that you can actually understand it at a deeper level and also see how it corresponds to other sources as well. So to start, the reason why we call it a sunstone is because it's actually detailing all of the different suns that our Earth has passed through. And so a lot of the codices, there are a few of them actually, but the one that comes to mind is the Codex Chimalpahin. Talks a lot about all of the different suns. And our ancestors believe, specifically the Mexica, the Tenochtitlan, believed that there were 5 different suns that occurred. And when we say sun, to them, they kind of looked at nature and they saw this repeated cycle of creation and destruction over and over again. And our ancestors were very scientific. They made a lot of observation, and they could see there were these organisms that were here before that aren't here anymore, and they were destroyed. And so, our Earth, scientifically speaking, has undergone 6 or 5 different major extinction events. Our ancestors knew this, and we know that because of what's written in this stone here. So the first sun, for example, here, this is the, here, for jaguar. It's, the people were eaten by jaguars and the sun was destroyed after 676 years. There were no survivors. Again, when we look at, over 90% of all the species on Earth, they were all destroyed. They all went extinct. There were no survivors. So the majority of life has gone extinct. And so our ancestors were able to make that observation and say, okay, well, the first sun, those people didn't continue living. The really interesting thing is the people in the first sun, they were called giants. Okay, our ancestors were very clear. They were not regular sized organisms or beings. They were really huge compared to us. And that just reminds me, there was evidence that the Maya and other people were actually digging up dinosaur bones and bones of all of these animals that are no longer living. So I think it's definitely likely that they saw this correlation between wow, the oldest animals seem to be bigger, and so they made that connection. Okay, the people were big at that time. Now, when they say people, who knows what that means, right? Uh, who knows if they thought that the people were, looked a lot different than us? Who knows if they thought they were modern humans? That's not, unfortunately, clear in the sources. My guess is that they understood that we probably didn't look, how we look today. But of course, that's just speculation. But I do, I do believe that one day we'll find some evidence of that. But as it stands, they're talking about people. They were giants. They were eaten by jaguars, and so there was an extinction event. Okay, and this was whenever you see so all of the different five suns, they're all labeled with the number four. Okay, and that's how they name it. So they just have different symbols here. This is four jaguar. The people were eaten by the jaguars, and we're not going to get into a lot of the mythology, but in mythology, if you look at it, it says, "Oh, Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl were arguing, and they had this kind of power struggle." You could read more about that. In other places, I'm more interested in, the application of interpreting the sunstone. But the second sun was a four wind, which is here. So you can count it here: 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is the sign for a hikkat or wind. People that were born here were blown away by the wind. The sun was destroyed. And this lasted 364 years, so a little shorter than this one. And interestingly enough, the survivors, the people who survived, they were turned into monkeys. And the way that they survived is they used their prehensile tails, which I should add that that's only a trait specific to the monkeys of the New World. The monkeys of the Old World don't have prehensile tails. Prehensile basically means that the tail functions as a hand, like they can grip a tree branch. And that's how the people of the second sun survived. So they weren't all destroyed. Our ancestors believed they were actually turned into monkeys. So, our ancestors would have looked at the monkeys in the forest and they would have said, "Oh, those are our ancestors from the second sun." Very interesting, especially when you look at evolutionary theory. Lots of similarities there. The third sun, okay, was for rain. The people who lived here were killed by the rain of fire. The sun was destroyed. Rain of fire is interpreted to mean probably like volcanic eruptions, which interestingly enough, some of the extinction events on planet Earth, scientifically speaking, were caused by exactly that. There were these huge supervolcanoes that went off at the same time, and they caused so much damage and gas to be emitted in the air that they caused widespread extinction. So this is an extinction event that our ancestors were on the same page with scientists about. There are writings in the Codices that show our ancestors were taught to turkeys as if they were their ancestors. The Spaniards were confused about that. Why are you calling them? They used to call the turkeys grandparents. Why are they calling them that? Well, here's the reason. They thought that the turkeys were the people who survived the extinction event in the third sun. Leads us to the fourth sun, for water. Now, as I'm going through this, you should be seeing a trend. The extinction event is actually tied to the symbol. So again, let's recap this. Jaguars. These jaguars killed all of the giant people. The wind killed all of the people here. The rain of fire. This is the symbol for rain. So rain of fire killed all of the people here. And this is the symbol for water. So you can guess what the extinction event was. In this case, there was a flood and the people were drowned and the sun was destroyed. The sun also lasted for 676 years. The people who survived, they were actually turned into fish. And so you can imagine if the whole world is flooded, people turn to fish, they can escape by swimming away. And so again, our ancestors would have saw the monkeys, these turkeys, and fish as ancestors as a result. Now the fifth sun is actually, it's hidden in plain sight. Most people wouldn't even be able to see where it's at, but it's actually here. Okay, fifth sun. It's four movement. So you may be wondering, well, where are the four? Because you have the four numerals, all of these little squares here, but they're actually magnified. So they're actually here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are four numerals. And then your next question might be, well, where's the movement? I don't see this guy here. Well, movement translates to Olim. And Olim is, I'll show you a picture on the next slide, but it's actually this symbol here. The outline of this entire scene is the actual symbol of Olim. So our ancestors were, I mean, their artistry was just breathtaking and just amazing. I mean, they were able to fit all of this information here. Not only that, but just mess with the different sizes. It's just wonderful. But how the people were going to die here was, and they're very clear about this, it was an earthquake during a solar eclipse. The sun would be destroyed. Okay, so that was their prediction of how the fifth sun would die. Now, our ancestors were really scared of that, obviously. They didn't want to be alive during the extinction event. And we'll talk more about that a little later, but just remember that fifth sun will die when there's an earthquake during a solar eclipse. So, as I said, this outline of this larger image is the sign Olim. This is the sign Olim. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is Nawi Olim, or 4 Olim, 4 movements. Okay, and you can see it highlighted here a little bit clearer. Okay, it's the sign of Olim, and it's just larger here. Okay, so that's where 4 Olim is. And the people will be killed when there's an earthquake during a solar eclipse, which brings us to the image. Because as we stated before, the images actually correspond to the thing that kills the people of that age. So following that, this image here in the middle should be the picture that's going to cause the extinction event for people on Earth. So let's go ahead and look at that. Now, just so you know, there have been a lot of different interpretations of who this is. And I'm just going to go through all of them, and I'll tell you about which one probably makes the most sense. This one is Tonatiuh. Tonatiuh is the sun. So most people for many years have said, okay, well, it's definitely Tonatiuh. Look, you can see it's face paint. See that? Face paint here. Okay. The only thing he's missing is this nose piercing. He doesn't have that here. So, he's got the face paint. You can see his hair is blonde, and that's to show that it's the sun rays. The sun rays are yellow, and so a lot of people will say, okay, well, these are the blonde sun rays, and we do have evidence that this was in fact colored yellow, but you can actually see the pigments still on the sculpture, traces of it. So our ancestors actually painted the whole thing. Could have been beautiful to see, but there's still some trace, and yes, it is indeed blonde. So therefore, people say, oh, it's got blonde hair, it's got face paint. He may not have, look, he even has the earrings here, right? These earrings look exactly the same here. That's why most people say, okay, well, that's the sun. Now, the problem with that is our ancestors said that the sun will be destroyed by a combination of earthquakes and a solar eclipse. So that's kind of leaving out the earthquake part of it, which brings us to the second interpretation. Come back to that one. But the second interpretation is that it is Tlatelolco, which is the earth. And so in this interpretation, you have the earrings there again. you also have this tongue here. It's actually not showing here. Yeah, do this. I'll move it. See it. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is the same. These are both stone sculptures, beautiful stone sculptures of Pratikutli. Pratikutli is translated as Earth Lord. And look at this tongue here. You see this tongue? It's actually a tekbat blade, which is a flint blade. And look at this. It's exactly the same as the tongue coming out of Donatello's mouth here. Okay? And so many people have then said, well, maybe then that means that this is Pratikutli. But as you saw in our previous lesson, our ancestors actually used symbols to represent many different things, and so it wasn't always straightforward. In fact, when people try to identify different different images as certain people or certain that they'll have a lot of trouble, and there's a lot of confusion because a sculpture might have the symbols of one theod and then also another one mixed in, and we see that a lot, quite a bit. It's like, wait a minute, that theod is not supposed to be holding that weapon, or that theod is not supposed to be wearing that hat, but there it is, and so it's led to a lot of confusion. But our ancestors did this intentionally to show, again, the different layers of meaning. So most likely what this is showing is, yes, this is the sun, Tonatiuh, but it's also Pratikutli, the earth, because Forolin is supposed to be destroyed by earthquakes during the solar eclipse, and therefore the earthquake is supposed to be represented by the earth, okay, because that's where the earthquakes come from, and so it makes sense that there would be an earth component here, okay, and so that is the most likely scenario here of explaining what's happening. Mixture of Pratikutli and Tonatiuh. There are some people who think that it's a portrait of Motokusoma Shokoyotsin, which is the Moctezuma II, and they say that this is his glyph for his name. It's actually found here. This one is kind of harder to believe. I mean, this doesn't look like him, right? And the people who do think that it's a portrait of him, the only evidence they have is that sometimes the Tlatoani, or the leader of Tenochtitlan, was likened to the sun, to Tonatiuh, and so that's their evidence. But again, very weak evidence, I would say. So I'm just throwing that out there because it is an interpretation. So you may hear people saying that, but just know there's not a lot of evidence to support that, and I don't think it's very likely. The last one is actually really interesting. This is the Tzitzime, and these are actually stars in the sky that attack the sun during a solar eclipse. So, they've got the flint tongue here. Looks like a lot of death imagery areas are similar. So there may be some component of the Tzitzime here, okay, to show, because they're associated with solar eclipses. Not as much iconography except for the tongue. And again, this tongue actually is an identical copy of this. So this one is a very compelling case. This one, we don't have a lot of representations of the Tzitzime, unfortunately. So we don't know if there is a version of the tongue that looks like that. But we know that, they have these claws as well. And Tlatoani also has the claws. So that is what kind of makes it a little interesting, because they both have, the claws look the same. Okay, and then if I go back here, you can see there are claws here. Okay, so the sun actually has claws. And I'll go back here. And it kind of looks like Tlahtecutli's claw, but this one looks very similar to this one. So there may be something there that they may be trying to show the solar eclipse within the Tlahtecutli. So in that case, there might be 3 layers there. But even if it's not this one, there are some solar eclipse imagery symbols that we're going to go over. So maybe not. Possibly it could just be the claws of Tlahtecutli and the tongue of Tlahtecutli, along with Tonatiuh. Now, anybody who has seen this can remember that there's a big symbol here. It's a big glyph for 13 Akat, or 13 reed. And this corresponds to 1479 if we're looking at the Mexica calendar, which, for people who are saying that this is a portrait of Moctezuma, doesn't really make sense. A lot of people think that this means that the sunstone was made in the year 1479. In that year, Moctezuma did not rule. In that year, the Tlatoani was Ashayacatl. So that would, if that's the case, that would not, it wouldn't be possible for this to be the portrait of Moctezuma Xocoyotzin years later. Interestingly enough, 13 Akat is the day when the 5th sun was born. So it could have those 2 meanings, okay? But definitely, I mean, if the 5th sun was born on that day, it's very fascinating that it would be here, because then you have Orolin, which corresponds to the name of the sun. And what's interesting about that is, and I also wrote an article about this. If you go to my blog, you can find it. I published it back in the winter. It was the winter solstice, the science of the winter solstice in our mythology. And in there, there's a myth that says that the sun was born, but it was stuck in the sky. It did not move. It was just stuck there. And so it didn't. They didn't get it to move until 4 Akat. If you read the article, you'll see that there's a scientific explanation for that in the winter solstice. When the sun rises at the winter solstice, it actually stays in the sun, in the sky, in the same spot for a few days. So that's what they're referring to here. You can read more about that at the blog. But this is the birth of the sun. But the reason why it's called Forolin is because it didn't start to move until 3 days after it was born. And that correlates to mythology. So that's why, again, I don't like to talk about mythology too much, because in my view, there are scientific observations there, and it's not just like a make-believe story. Like, there are actually scientific observations that we can pull from there and use and apply. Then you have this sign. This sign is 1 Tecpat. This is 1 flint knife. This is Huitzilopochtli's birthday. Really important to the Mexica. Nobody else in Mexico cared about Huitzilopochtli. I mean, he was the ruler of the Mexica. He's the one who guided them from Aztlan to Mexico Tenochtitlan. And so what they did is they tried to make him more important than he was. And so they inserted him in different ceremonies and, tried to assign him to a direction and that thing. But beyond Mexico Tenochtitlan, you don't really see too much about him. But this was his birthday. Okay, this is the day he was born, or Stonali. And so it was 1 Tecpat. So this was kind of to show that this is important, because Huitzilopochtli is their version of the sun in the Mexica. Like, they tried to transpose Huitzilopochtli onto Tonatiuh, which was the older version of the sun that most people agreed with. So that's what they're trying to do here. It's also the departure from Aztlan. So it could be, again, layered meanings. So it could mean multiple things, but we know for sure, since they were trying to get Huitzilopochtli as a prominent feature. I mean, he's not here in the portrait, but he is here. So he's here in spirit, even though they know that the Tonatiuh was more important. Now, when it comes to the solar eclipse, there's actually some really interesting day signs here, and nobody has ever really been able to even come up with an explanation as to what these mean. So there's only one that I know of, and it's actually related to the solar eclipse. And so this sign is one Kiawit, and this sign is one Osomati. These are actually days in the Tonalpoali, or the ceremonial calendar. If you count the days from one Kiawit to one Osomati, it's exactly 33 days. Scientifically speaking, every year, when scientists say there could possibly be a solar eclipse, there's always a 33-day window between when that solar eclipse can possibly occur. Our ancestors knew that. We know they knew that because they made predictions in a lot of their books. They made predictions for solar eclipses, and they also made predictions for lunar eclipses. And this is one of them here. This is a 33-day period approximately. There's no other reason why there would be a 33-day period on the sunstone other than to show these are the days in which a solar eclipse can possibly happen. And why is that important? Well, it could possibly be the end of the world. If it's a full solar eclipse, that's it. That's the end. That's the extinction event. And so our people looked at that with dread, and that's the reason why they wanted to track it, but also put it on here like, hey, in the future, that's going to be our extinction event. That's how we're going to all die. All people will die. And there's a lot of evidence to support the idea that our people were scared of the solar eclipse. A lot of people, like maestros and all that, they try to spin everything so positively. Like, oh, how could our people be scared of, something if they knew the science behind it? Well, listen, they may have known the science behind it, but to them, they didn't understand, what was actually happening. They didn't understand that it was just shadows and that it was nothing to be afraid of. For them, the sunlight was being extinguished, and without the sunlight, that's the basis of our entire philosophy. Without the sunlight, there's nothing. There's no heat, there's no tonality, there's no light, and so our ancestors were really scared of that. And this is what it would look like. Our ancestors would be able to see. The sky would be full of stars, but these are the prominent stars that we can see. This is a solar eclipse, so the shadow is covering the sun, and so there's no light coming. And here's another one: eclipse sun during totality. This is important because our people didn't really fear all solar eclipses. Sometimes there's a partial solar eclipse, and only a part of the sun is blocked, but they fear the one where it's a total eclipse of the sun. It's just completely covered and there's no sunlight coming. Now, going back to that image that I showed you of the Titime, they actually thought, again, that these stars were attacking the sun. Okay, so again, there's scientific observations, different hypotheses. They obviously didn't know that there was a shadow. They thought that all of the stars that were surrounding the sun, and they were actually attacking it. And I'll show you later in later lessons. There's codices of Venus, especially, they have darts and spears because they're always attacking the sun. And this is a great example of that. So in their mind, they didn't know what these things were. They called them titsime, and they felt like, hey man, they're attacking our sun. And so they felt like after they attacked the sun, they would come to Earth and then kill all the people, they eat all the people. And that's what they thought would be the final extinction event. And when we're talking about codices and how there's layers of meaning, there's also a lot of information from codices that pop up in all kinds of other places. I said that the sun was being attacked. This is a page from the Borgia, the Codex Borgia. We're going to talk more about that later in subsequent lessons. But what you can see here is that this is the sun, and we know it's the sun. This is not a view because this is the image of the sun. And he's got a hat as well. And look at that, Nelson has the nose piercing and the face paint. So, after you're done with these classes, you're going to get really good at identifying Teteo. The really interesting thing here about this page is usually Donatello is red because the sun is bright. The sun is bright red. You look at the sky. In this case, he's black. And so this is actually showing us a total solar eclipse. The sun is completely covered. When you look at the sky, the sun is black. And look at this. The sun is actually being attacked. And all of the different suns, these are all symbols for suns, they're being cut open by all, these are all the tzitzime that we just saw, the stars in the sky. And they're cutting open all of the symbols for the sun. And that's really important because our people associated the sun with heat, and they associated the heat with fire, and they associated heat with blood. So this blood that you see spilling out is all of the heat and all of the energy, or what our ancestors would call the tonali, the energy or the heat coming out of the sun. So Donati was slowly being drained of all of his energy. And so our ancestors understood in this event, we would die, you know, because our ancestors understood without the sun, we're dead. And that's why they were so fearful of this total solar eclipse during an earthquake. And you can see Tlatecuhtli up here. This is the earth. Okay, so the earthquake imagery is there, just as we would expect it to be. And then all of the days that we saw on the Aztec Sun Stone, they're actually all here. There's 33 days, one kiawit, all the way to one osamatli. Look at that. They're all there. So they had it down to these specific 33 days. And these 33 days, you better watch out because there could possibly be a solar eclipse and it could be the end of the fifth sun. And so our ancestors were really wary of that, you know, really paid close attention to that. So again, there, you know, whenever you see this, these same numbers that correspond to the Aztec Sunstone, you know right away, okay, they're talking about the same thing. And so you'll find that as you learn how to read the Codices, you can get information. You know, the Spaniards may have burned our books. Yeah, that's right. But the books that we have remaining and these sculptures, we can get so much information out of it. And so that's what I want to, that's basically the message that I want to get out, is that we should be studying this stuff. We should be understanding it. This symbol here, you should, if you saw last week's lesson, should be familiar. It's the, it's actually the page 1 of the Codex for Jeffrey Meyer. If you remember, there's the center of the Kutli, and then all of the different directions. This is actually, it actually has a name mathematically. It's called the Quincunx. And so if you count them out on the calendar, there's 52 of them. So that's showing a 52-year round, which is a very precarious time because after the 52 years, you know, they thought that the sun could possibly be extinguished at that time as well. Hence the new fire ceremony to really reignite the new fire after the 52 years were up. But it's also showing directions because, as we know, whenever you see this symbol, okay, if you remember from the Codex for Jeffrey Meyer, this is the east, this is the north, this is the west, and this is the south. Okay, and then you have these other cardinal directions here as well, and the center. And so this Quincunx, pay attention because it's going to be all over Mesoamerica. This is a convent in Culhuacan, DF. And so whenever you see that, just remember the 4 directions because that's what that is trying to signify. And there are, you know, we'll look more at different examples of that as we move forward in our lessons. The last thing I was going to show you is just that if you remember last time I showed you that there were starting days of the months and for the different years. These signs right here are for the year bearers. Okay, so you want to get used to these signs. Anytime you see it, it means it's the year. So this is the year Flint. This is the year Kali. This is the year Tochli. And this is the year Akka. And so these are all of the 4 different years that could possibly be. And so they're highlighted here. But if you look, the beginning months and the end of the months is also here. Where I talked to you about it in the last lesson with the Codex for Jeffrey Meyer. So this is saying that in the years Akat, all of the months will start with Sipakli and they'll end with Shochi. This one is saying that in all of the years, and we know it's talking about the year bearers, all of the years Tochli, that all the months will start with Koska Kwatli and they'll end with Kwatli. This is the vulture, this is an eagle, this is the alligator, this is a flower. If we move down here, this is saying that in the year Kali, or house, all the months will start with Osamatli, they'll end with Itzquitli. This is monkey and this is dog. And then this last one is saying that in the year Tekbat, all of the months will start with Mikisli, or death. And then this one I can't read. Oh, this is Koat, snake. And so this imagery, I mean, if you want to calibrate our calendars, I mean, we have two sources now. The first page is the Codex Vijayri Minor, and now we have this. If your months don't start on Sipakli in Akat years, if your months don't start on Mekitsli and Tekpat years and so forth, then you know that your calendar correlation is incorrect. And most of the calendar correlations out there are definitely incorrect as a result, which is, there's no excuse for that because we have the instructions on how to keep it correlated right here so that we don't lose track of time, because time for our ancestors was so important and they wanted to really make sure that they understood, you know, what day it was and what it meant. The last thing that I'll show you is there's the Shiokoat. Shiokoat is the fire snake, and you can see it here. See if I can go back to show you. Okay, there you go. And so they actually have faces here. Okay, so this one, if you remember the nose piercing, you should know who this is, right? This is Donatu, the sun. Okay, so the sun as a fire serpent. And then on this side, you have Shutaputli. If you remember from last week's lesson, was in the middle of the first page of the Vijayri Minor. And the Shiokoat is supposed to, the fire serpent is supposed to represent the sun rays from the sun. Shutaputli represents fire and time. And then Donatu, of course, represents the sun. So these two together are showing you that the sun is directly related to the heat and also time, the tracking of time. And that is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. But thank you so much for being a patron, and thank you very much for taking the time to learn about the Aztec Sun Stone.